The Galactic Academy stood as the pinnacle of interstellar education, a sprawling complex orbiting the twin suns of the Veldar system. Its shining towers of crystalline steel reflected the light of the twin stars, making it a beacon visible from the surrounding planetary colonies. Every cycle, the Academy admitted the brightest and strongest from across the galaxy's many species, training future leaders, strategists, and warriors. To the Academy's students, the name Earth was little more than a footnote in their galactic history classes. Humans were considered primitive, their physical abilities deemed unimpressive compared to species bred for combat or survival in extreme environments. The buzz of excitement across the Academy's halls was almost palpable on the day Lieutenant Alice Cross arrived. Whispers spread like wildfire among the student body, an eclectic mix of towering Thralexians, whose muscular forms dwarfed most humanoids, delicate but sharp-witted Brenneri, whose translucent skin glimmered faintly in the light, and the insectoid Kraven, whose chitinous exoskeletons were as much armor as they were skin. Alice, standing at a modest 5'8", cut a striking yet humble figure in her simple military uniform. Her dark hair was tied back tightly, her expression calm and unreadable as she stepped off the transport shuttle onto the Academy's polished deck. "She doesn't look like much," muttered Jalar, a hulking Thralexian cadet whose biceps alone seemed to rival Alice's entire frame in size. His deep, guttural voice carried across the room, drawing the attention of other students. Beside him, Brennari scholar Aniris tilted her head, her wide, luminous eyes studying Alice with mild curiosity. "Humans are soft," Aniris said in her melodic tone, her voice tinged with condescension. "Their bones are fragile, their muscles underdeveloped. She won't last a week." Jalar chuckled, his laughter echoing through the corridor as Alice walked past them. She caught the edge of his laughter but didn't break stride, her boots clicking against the pristine floor with a rhythm as steady as her heartbeat. Her commanding officer back on Earth had warned her about this, the skepticism she would face as the Academy's first human student. "They'll underestimate you," he had said with a grin. "Use it. Make them eat their words." As Alice approached the central atrium, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Students paused mid-conversation to glance at her, their expressions ranging from amused to indifferent. Some whispered to one another, making no effort to hide their opinions. "Why would the Academy even accept a human?" one Kraven student hissed, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "This place is for the elite." "Perhaps they're desperate for diversity," replied another, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Alice ignored them all. Her expression remained neutral, her eyes focused straight ahead as she followed the holographic guidelights leading her to the administration wing. Inside, her thoughts churned. She had faced skepticism before. Humans often did when stepping into intergalactic spaces. But this was different. Here, the disdain was palpable, as if her presence alone was an affront to the Academy's prestige. When she reached the admissions office, a sleek room filled with floating consoles and glowing displays, the administrative officer barely glanced at her. The officer, a craven with intricate golden patterns etched into his exoskeleton, handed her a datapad without a word. Alice took it, her grip firm, and scanned the details of her assigned quarters, schedule, and orientation briefing. "Lieutenant Cross," she said, her voice crisp as she addressed the officer. "Is there anything else I need to know?" The Krevan finally looked up, his compound eyes narrowing slightly. "Only that the Academy expects excellence," he said, his tone clipped. "If you're here to prove something human, you'll need more than your species' misplaced determination." Alice nodded, her expression unflinching. "Noted," she replied before turning on her heel and leaving the office. Her quarters were small but functional, a stark contrast to the luxurious accommodations afforded to students from wealthier planets. The walls were bare, the furniture minimal, and the only decoration was a small window offering a view of the Academy's sprawling campus. Alice unpacked quickly, her movements efficient and methodical. Among her belongings, she placed a small photograph on the bedside table, a picture of her family back on Earth. It was a reminder of why she was here, a silent vow to herself that she would not let her people down. The orientation briefing was held in the Grand Auditorium, a cavernous space capable of holding thousands of students. The room buzzed with energy as students filed in, their conversations filling the air with a cacophony of voices in dozens of languages. Alice took her seat near the back, deliberately avoiding the clusters of students who had already begun forming social circles. She scanned the room, observing the dynamics between species, noting who seemed to dominate and who lingered on the fringes. The Academy's dean, a towering figure from the crystalline Vornith race, took the stage. His voice resonated through the hall, a deep, melodic sound that commanded attention. He spoke of the Academy's legacy, its mission to train the galaxy's finest, and the importance of unity among its diverse student body. Yet, even as he spoke of unity, Alice could feel the invisible barriers around her, the unspoken doubts of those seated nearby. After the briefing, Jalar and Anarese found her again. Jalar's towering form cast a long shadow over her as he smirked down at her. "So, human," he said, his voice oozing mockery, "ready to prove us all wrong? Or will you break before the real trials even begin?" Alice met his gaze, her expression calm but unwavering. "Guess you'll find out soon enough," she said, her tone even. She refused to rise to his bait, knowing that any sign of weakness would only fuel their disdain. As she walked away, she heard Jalar chuckle again. "Fragile," he muttered, the word dripping with contempt. That night, Alice sat alone in her quarters, reviewing the Academy's curriculum on her datapad. The courses were rigorous, designed to push even the most resilient species to their limits. She studied the combat modules in particular, knowing that her physical abilities would be under intense scrutiny. Her thoughts drifted to Jalar's words, to the way the students had looked at her as if she were already defeated. She clenched her fists, a spark of determination igniting within her. "They think I'm fragile," she muttered to herself. "I'll show them just how wrong they are." The next day, as the Academy's training grounds came alive with activity, Alice stepped onto the field with her head held high. She could feel the stares, the whispers, but she blocked them out. She wasn't here to make friends or prove a point to individuals like Jalar. She was here for something bigger, for Earth, for humanity, and for herself. And she would not fail. The combat endurance trials were less than a week away, and the Academy buzzed with the electric tension of competition. On the training grounds, cadets from every species pushed themselves to the limit, preparing for the grueling tests that would determine not just their rankings, but their reputations among their peers. For Alice Cross, this was no mere test of skill. It was her chance to prove that she belonged here. The Academy's training regimen was relentless, designed to break even the most disciplined cadets. Each day began with a series of physical challenges, from weighted runs across jagged terrain to simulated zero-gravity combat drills. The afternoons were reserved for strategic exercises where cadets navigated holographic battlefields, their decisions scrutinized by instructors. Evenings were spent analyzing footage of past trials, dissecting every mistake and success. For Alice, the days blurred together into a haze of sweat, pain, and determination. She spent her mornings running alongside towering Thralexians and sprinting past nimble Brennari, her breath ragged but steady. She pushed her body further than she ever had before, ignoring the ache in her muscles and the sting of her skin as she fell and scraped herself against the harsh training surfaces. During combat drills, she found herself paired with cadets who underestimated her, their smug expressions vanishing when she outmaneuvered them with a combination of precision and speed. One such cadet, a craven named Drelvac, learned this lesson the hard way. His exoskeleton gleamed under the training dome's artificial light as he squared off against Alice, his mandibles clicking in anticipation. He towered over her, his limbs a mass of segmented armor that seemed impenetrable. As the simulation began, Drelvac charged, his claws slicing through the air with deadly intent. She feinted left, then spun to the right, delivering a sharp blow to the joint of his left leg. Drelvac stumbled, his balance momentarily disrupted, and Alice seized the opportunity to drive him back. When the buzzer sounded, signaling her victory, the murmurs of surprise from the observing cadets were impossible to ignore. But not everyone was impressed. Jalar watched from the sidelines, his arms crossed over his massive chest. His piercing gaze followed Alice's every move, his lips curling into a smirk when she faltered or hesitated. She could feel the weight of his scrutiny, but she refused to let it distract her. If anything, it fueled her resolve. After the day's training ended, Alice stayed behind in the combat dome, replaying the simulation footage on her datapad. She studied her movements, noting every misstep and moment of hesitation. The training dome was empty now, the other cadets having returned to their quarters or the communal halls, but Alice remained, her focus unbroken. "You're pushing yourself too hard," a voice called out, breaking the silence. She turned to see Anaris standing near the entrance, her translucent form shimmering faintly. The Brunari cadet's expression was unreadable, her luminous eyes fixed on Alice. Alice didn't respond immediately. She saved the footage on her datapad and placed it on the bench beside her before looking up. "Hard enough is the only way to win," she said simply, her tone matter-of-fact. Anna Reese tilted her head, her movements almost serpentine. "Winning isn't everything. Surviving the trials is, and exhaustion won't help you do that." "I'm not here to survive," Alice said, standing and wiping the sweat from her brow. "I'm here to prove that I'm just as capable as any of you." Anir studied her for a moment longer before giving a slight nod. "Then, don't burn yourself out before you get the chance to prove it." With that, the Brunari turned and left, her ethereal figure fading into the shadows of the corridor. Alice watched her go, a flicker of doubt crossing her mind. Was she overdoing it? Was her determination blinding her to the very real risk of pushing her body too far? She dismissed the thought almost as quickly as it came. There was no room for doubt, not now. The next morning brought another set of challenges, this time focused on endurance. The cadets were led to the outdoor simulation zone, a sprawling expanse of rugged terrain designed to mimic the harsh conditions of various planetary environments. Jagged cliffs loomed overhead, while narrow paths wound through dense vegetation that clawed at their uniforms as they passed. The instructors, clad in black and silver, observed from elevated platforms, their sharp eyes catching every misstep. The objective was straightforward: reach the beacon at the far end of the zone before the timer ran out. What the cadets didn't know was that the zone was rigged with traps, hidden pitfalls, collapsing ledges, and simulated predators programmed to hunt them. As the timer began, the cadets sprinted forward, their movements a chaotic flurry of limbs and determination. Alice kept her pace steady, her eyes scanning the path ahead for signs of danger. She saw Jalar take the lead, his massive form barreling through the undergrowth with brute force. Anaris moved with calculated precision, her light frame allowing her to navigate the narrow paths with ease. Alice followed close behind, her movements deliberate and efficient. Halfway through the course, the traps began to spring. A cadet ahead of her triggered a hidden pitfall, his scream echoing as he fell into the safety net below. Alice veered left, avoiding the same fate, but her path was blocked by a simulated predator. A towering beast with gleaming fangs and claws. It lunged at her, its roar reverberating through the air, but Alice didn't falter. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its strike, and scrambled up a rocky incline to escape. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she reached the top, her heart pounding in her chest. By the time she reached the beacon, her body was screaming in protest. Her legs felt like lead, her arms ached from the strain of pulling herself over obstacles, and her uniform was torn in several places. But she had made it, crossing the finish line just behind Anaris and a few other cadets. Jalar, already there, smirked as she approached. "Not bad," he said, his tone mocking. Alice didn't respond. She stood tall, her chin lifted despite the exhaustion etched across her face. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. As the day ended and the cadets filed back to their quarters, Alice lingered once again, replaying the events of the day in her mind. She had survived another test, but the trials ahead would only grow more challenging. She tightened her fists, determination burning in her eyes. No matter what lay ahead, she would not back down. The combat endurance trials loomed ever closer, and the air at the academy seemed charged with an almost tangible tension. Alice Cross spent her days navigating the grueling training schedule with a determination that had become the subject of quiet conversations among some cadets. Whispers of her victories in combat drills and her near-flawless navigation of the simulated wilderness had begun to spread, though none of her peers openly acknowledged her growing reputation. For many, especially those like Joar, her successes only added fuel to their disdain, convinced that luck or circumstance, not skill, had carried her through. As the week progressed, the Academy's instructors shifted the focus of their exercises. The cadets were now paired in randomized teams for cooperative missions, designed to test their ability to work under pressure while navigating dangerous and unpredictable environments. Each team was given a series of objectives to complete in a simulated war zone, their progress monitored in real time by the instructors. When Alice arrived at the staging area, her data pad displayed her assignment. Her heart sank slightly as she read the names. She had been paired with Jalar and Drelvac, two cadets who had made no effort to hide their contempt for her. While Drelvac had begrudgingly accepted his defeat in the earlier combat drill, Jalar's animosity seemed to have only deepened over time. She braced herself, knowing the next few hours would test not just her physical endurance, but her ability to maintain her focus despite their hostility. The mission brief was simple in theory: infiltrate a hostile outpost, retrieve a data module, and extract safely. The simulation area was vast, filled with towering ruins, dense foliage, and hidden enemies programmed to attack without hesitation. The cadets were equipped with stun weapons and lightweight armor, and their success would depend on their ability to communicate and strategize effectively. As the team gathered at the starting point, Jalar wasted no time asserting his dominance. He towered over both Alice and Drelvac, his broad shoulders and massive frame making him an imposing figure. "Here's how this is going to work," Jalar said, his deep voice filled with authority. "I'll take point. Drelvac, you cover the flank, and you," he turned to Alice, his gaze sharp and condescending, "stay out of the way and don't screw this up." Alice met his gaze without flinching, her expression calm. "We'll complete the mission faster if we actually work together," she said evenly. "We should," Jalar cut her off with a scoff. "I don't need advice from someone who barely made it through the last exercise. Just follow my lead." Drelvac shifted slightly, his mandibles clicking in a way that suggested discomfort, but he said nothing. Alice clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay composed. Arguing with Jalar now would only waste time. She gave a curt nod and adjusted the straps on her gear, mentally preparing herself for what lay ahead. The simulation began with a burst of light and sound as the staging area transformed into a chaotic war zone. Explosions echoed in the distance, and the air was filled with the crackle of simulated gunfire. Jalar immediately charged forward, his massive frame barreling through the undergrowth with little regard for stealth. Alice exchanged a brief glance with Drelvac before following, her movements more measured as she scanned the surroundings for threats. The first objective was a recon point located in the remains of a crumbling tower. As they approached, a swarm of simulated drones descended upon them, their metallic forms gleaming in the dim light. Jalar roared a challenge, his stun rifle spitting bursts of energy as he charged into the fray. Drelvac followed suit, his claws tearing through the drones with brutal efficiency. Alice hung back, her sharp eyes catching movements in the shadows. She spotted a second wave of drones approaching from the rear, their weapons primed and ready. Without hesitation, she raised her rifle and fired, her shots precise and calculated. One by one, the drones fell, their metallic bodies crumpling to the ground. "Watch your six!" Alice shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Jalar turned just in time to see the last drone fall, his expression a mix of surprise and irritation. "I had it under control," he growled, his tone dismissive. Alice bit back a retort and focused on the mission. With the area clear, the team secured the recon point and moved on to the next objective. The second phase of the mission took them deep into the heart of the simulation zone, where the dense foliage and uneven terrain made navigation difficult. Jalar's impatience quickly became apparent as he pushed ahead without waiting for his teammates, his heavy footsteps leaving a clear trail behind him. Alice and Drelvac exchanged wary glances but said nothing, their focus on keeping pace and staying alert. When they reached the outpost, the team encountered their most significant challenge yet, a fortified structure guarded by a squad of simulated enemies. Jalar's approach was as direct as ever. He charged in headfirst, his stun rifle blazing. The enemies responded in kind, their return fire forcing him to take cover behind a fallen beam. Drelvac moved to flank the enemies, his claws striking with deadly precision. Alice, meanwhile, used the chaos to her advantage, slipping into the shadows and navigating her way toward the outpost's entrance. Her smaller frame and quick reflexes allowed her to avoid detection as she slipped past the guards and into the structure. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Alice's footsteps were silent as she moved through the dimly lit corridors, her rifle at the ready. She reached the control room and located the data module, her fingers flying over the console as she extracted the information. The sound of approaching footsteps made her freeze, her heart pounding as she pressed herself against the wall. A guard entered the room, his weapon drawn, but before he could react, Alice struck, her movements swift and decisive. The guard crumpled to the ground, and Alice slipped out of the room, the data module secure in her pack. Outside, the battle was still raging. Jalar had taken several hits and was visibly frustrated, his roars of anger echoing across the battlefield. Drelvac was faring better, his movements calculated as he dispatched the remaining enemies. Alice rejoined them just as the final guard fell, her presence unnoticed until she spoke. "I've got the module," she said, her voice steady. Jalar turned to her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and irritation. "You went in alone?" he demanded. "It was the best option," she replied, her tone calm but firm. "Let's move. The extraction point is 2 clicks north." Jalar didn't argue, though his jaw tightened in frustration. The team made their way to the extraction point, their pace quick but cautious. When they finally reached safety, the simulation ended, and the environment dissolved back into the sterile staging area. As the instructors reviewed the mission footage, Jalar remained silent, his expression dark. Drelvac, however, approached Alice, his mandibles clicking in what she recognized as a gesture of acknowledgement. "You did well," he said simply. Alice nodded, her expression unreadable. "So did you." As the debriefing concluded, Alice couldn't help but feel a flicker of satisfaction. The mission had been far from perfect, but she had proven herself once again. And while Jalar's hostility remained, she knew that her actions were beginning to speak louder than his words. The combat endurance trials were still ahead, but for the first time since her arrival, Alice felt a spark of hope. She was ready for whatever came next. The week of the combat endurance trials finally arrived, and the academy was a hive of activity. The cadets moved with a palpable mix of anticipation and tension, their conversations subdued as they prepared for what many considered the most challenging test of their lives. For Alice Cross, the days leading up to the trial were spent in rigorous preparation. She meticulously reviewed the layout of the trial zones and studied the patterns of the simulated threats she might encounter. Though she kept to herself, her focus and intensity had not gone unnoticed. On the morning of the trial, Alice stood in her quarters, methodically securing the straps of her combat gear. She examined her reflection in the small mirror, her expression calm but resolute. The faint scars on her arms, remnants of battles fought long before she had arrived at the academy, served as a reminder of her resilience. She adjusted the rifle slung across her back and took a deep breath before leaving the room. The staging area was bustling with activity as cadets filed in, their chatter hushed under the watchful eyes of the instructors. The trial was designed to test every aspect of a cadet's abilities: strength, endurance, strategy, and adaptability. Each participant would face a randomized series of challenges, ensuring no one had an advantage. Success was determined not by how quickly a cadet completed the course, but by how well they performed under pressure and how effectively they utilized their skills. Alice joined the line of cadets awaiting their turn, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd. She spotted Jolar further down the line, his imposing figure towering over those around him. His expression was one of grim determination, though a flicker of irritation crossed his face when his gaze met hers. She ignored him, focusing instead on the task ahead. When her name was called, Alice stepped forward, her movements deliberate and precise. The instructor, a stern-faced Vornith with crystalline skin, handed her a datapad detailing her objectives. The trial was divided into 3 distinct phases: reconnaissance, retrieval, and extraction. Each phase presented unique challenges, and cadets were expected to adapt to rapidly changing conditions. Alice's trial began in a dense forest simulation, the air thick with humidity and the distant sound of wildlife adding to the realism. Her first objective was to locate a hidden relay station and upload critical data, all while evading patrolling enemy drones. She moved through the underbrush with practiced stealth, her senses heightened as she scanned her surroundings. The dense foliage provided ample cover, but it also limited her visibility, forcing her to rely on her instincts. As she approached the relay station, Alice spotted a pair of drones circling the area. Their metallic forms gleamed in the dappled sunlight, their sensors sweeping the ground for any sign of movement. She crouched low, her heart pounding as she assessed the situation. Her rifle was equipped with a silencer, but taking out both drones without alerting others would require precise timing. She waited, her breathing steady, until the drones crossed paths. In a fluid motion, she raised her rifle and fired 2 quick shots. Both drones dropped silently to the ground, their lights flickering out. Alice moved swiftly to the relay station, her fingers flying over the console as she uploaded the data. The process took longer than expected, and her pulse quickened as she heard the distant hum of approaching reinforcements. The moment the upload was complete, she darted back into the forest, her movements silent and controlled. The second phase of the trial took Alice to a ruined cityscape, where her objective was to retrieve a data module from a heavily guarded structure. The simulated environment was eerily realistic, with crumbling buildings and debris littering the streets. Alice's approach was cautious, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. She encountered resistance almost immediately, 2 humanoid guards armed with energy weapons. She engaged them in a tense firefight, using the rubble for cover as she returned fire. Her shots were precise, and both guards were neutralized within moments. Inside the building, the air was thick with tension. The narrow corridors and dim lighting made every shadow a potential threat. Alice's movements were deliberate as she navigated the maze-like structure, her rifle at the ready. When she reached the data module, she encountered a final obstacle: a towering combat droid programmed to defend the module at all costs. The droid's heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor as it advanced, its glowing red eyes locked on Alice. She moved quickly, firing a series of shots aimed at its joints. The droid absorbed the initial barrage, its armor proving resilient. But Alice's persistence paid off as she targeted a weak point near its power core. With a final, well-placed shot, the droid collapsed in a shower of sparks. Alice retrieved the module and exited the building, her body tense but her mind focused. The final phase of the trial was an extraction mission, requiring Alice to navigate treacherous terrain while avoiding enemy patrols. The path to the extraction point was marked by jagged cliffs and narrow ledges, the simulated environment designed to test her physical endurance and mental fortitude. As she climbed a steep incline, her muscles burned with exertion, but she pushed herself forward, refusing to let fatigue slow her down. Halfway to the extraction point, Alice encountered a patrol of enemy soldiers. She dropped to the ground, her breath shallow as she assessed the situation. The patrol consisted of 4 soldiers, their movements coordinated and methodical. Engaging them head-on was not an option. She needed to find another way. Spotting a cluster of boulders nearby, she formulated a plan. Alice carefully placed a small explosive charge among the boulders, setting a timer before retreating to a safe distance. When the patrol passed by, the charge detonated, sending the boulders tumbling down and scattering the soldiers. Using the chaos to her advantage, Alice slipped past the patrol and continued toward the extraction point. As she neared the end of the trial, Alice's body ached from the physical demands of the course, but her mind remained sharp. The sight of the extraction beacon in the distance filled her with a surge of determination, and she quickened her pace. When she finally crossed the finish line, the simulated environment dissolved, and she found herself back in the staging area. The instructors reviewed her performance in silence, their expressions unreadable. Alice stood at attention, her breathing steady despite the exhaustion coursing through her body. When the lead instructor finally spoke, his tone was neutral but firm. "Well done, Lieutenant Cross." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Alice felt deeply. She had completed the trial, proving once again that she was more than capable of standing alongside the Academy's best. As she walked away from the staging area, the whispers of her peers followed her. Some were filled with surprise, others with begrudging respect. Alice didn't acknowledge them. Her focus was already on what lay ahead. The combat endurance trials were only the beginning. The days following the combat endurance trials were marked by a strange mix of silence and anticipation. The results had not yet been announced, leaving the cadets in a state of restless uncertainty. For Alice Cross, the experience had been a turning point. She had pushed herself to her absolute limits and emerged stronger, though she carried the weight of knowing that her journey was far from over. Her performance had caught the attention of both her peers and instructors, and with it came a heightened sense of scrutiny. Alice spent the quiet moments before the announcement in reflection. The Academy's halls, usually buzzing with activity, now felt eerily still. She used the time to review her performance, analyzing every decision she had made during the trials. Despite her success, she knew she couldn't afford to grow complacent. The Academy was a place of constant evolution, and she was determined to keep improving. When the announcement finally came, the cadets gathered in the grand auditorium, their faces a mix of anxiety and determination. The air was thick with tension as the Academy's dean, his crystalline form shimmering under the artificial lights, took the stage. His deep, resonant voice carried across the room as he began to speak, his words measured and deliberate. "Each of you has faced challenges that tested not only your physical abilities but also your resilience, strategy, and determination. The combat endurance trials are not just a measure of skill, but a reflection of your potential to lead and adapt under pressure." As the dean spoke, Alice kept her gaze fixed on him, her expression calm but focused. She felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she refused to let it show. When the dean began announcing the top performers, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Jalar's name was called first, his towering form rising from his seat as he accepted the recognition with a self-satisfied smirk. Alice felt a flicker of irritation but quickly pushed it aside. Her focus remained on the dean as he continued down the list. When her name was finally called, a ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Alice stood, her movements deliberate as she made her way to the stage. The dean's piercing gaze met hers, and she could see a flicker of something in his crystalline eyes. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity. "Lieutenant Cross," the dean said, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs, "your performance during the trials demonstrated not only skill but also a level of adaptability and determination that sets you apart. You have proven that you belong here." The applause that followed was hesitant at first, but it grew steadily louder. Alice felt a surge of emotion rise within her, but she kept her expression neutral as she accepted the recognition. She returned to her seat, her mind already racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The weeks that followed were a blur of training, assessments, and new challenges. Alice's reputation within the Academy began to shift. While some cadets, like Jalar, remained openly hostile, others began to view her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Anaris, the Brenari cadet who had once regarded her with skepticism, now sought her out during training sessions, offering insights and advice that Alice found invaluable. It was during one of these sessions that Alice encountered an unexpected opportunity. The Academy had announced a joint training exercise with a nearby fleet, a rare chance for cadets to work alongside active military personnel. The exercise was designed to simulate a large-scale conflict, with each cadet assigned a specific role within the operation. Alice was chosen to lead a reconnaissance team, a decision that sparked both excitement and anxiety within her. The exercise began with a briefing that outlined the mission's objectives. Alice's team was tasked with infiltrating enemy territory and gathering intelligence on their defenses. The mission required precision, coordination, and a level of trust that Alice knew would be difficult to foster, given the lingering doubts some of her teammates still harbored. As the exercise unfolded, Alice found herself facing challenges that tested her leadership in ways she hadn't anticipated. The simulated environment was chaotic, with unexpected variables that forced her to make split-second decisions. When her team encountered a series of ambushes, Alice's quick thinking and adaptability proved crucial. She devised a strategy that allowed them to evade capture and complete their objective, earning the grudging respect of even her most skeptical teammates. The debriefing that followed was intense, with instructors dissecting every aspect of the operation. While there were areas for improvement, Alice's performance was praised for its ingenuity and effectiveness. The experience solidified her position within the Academy and marked a turning point in her journey. In the weeks that followed, Alice continued to push herself, her determination unwavering. She forged new alliances and strengthened existing ones, slowly building a network of support within the Academy. Jaller remained a constant source of tension, his disdain for her undiminished, but Alice learned to navigate his hostility with a calm resolve that left him increasingly frustrated. The final turning point came during a live demonstration for visiting dignitaries from the Galactic Council. The Academy's top cadets were chosen to participate in a combat simulation that showcased their skills and teamwork. Alice was paired with Jalar, a decision that raised eyebrows and sparked whispers among the cadets. The simulation was intense, with high stakes and limited resources. Jalar's aggressive tactics clashed with Alice's more strategic approach, creating tension that threatened to derail their mission. But when the situation took a critical turn, a simulated civilian convoy caught in the crossfire, Alice's leadership shone through. She took command, devising a plan that not only secured the convoy's safety, but also neutralized the enemy forces. As the simulation ended, the audience erupted in applause. Alice and Jalar stood side by side, their expressions a study in contrast. Jalar's pride was tempered by the realization that Alice's leadership had been the key to their success. For the first time, he offered her a grudging nod of respect, a gesture that spoke volumes. In the days that followed, Alice's reputation within the Academy reached new heights. She had proven herself not just as a capable cadet, but as a leader who could inspire and unite those around her. The journey had been anything but easy, but Alice knew that every challenge she had faced had prepared her for what lay ahead. As she stood on the observation deck, gazing out at the stars, Alice felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had come to the Academy to prove herself, and she had done so. But more importantly, she had discovered her own strength and resilience, qualities that would carry her through whatever challenges the future held. The stars stretched endlessly before her, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the countless opportunities that awaited. Alice Cross was ready to face them all.